The highly anticipated newest Mission Impossible movie has finally hit theaters. It's no surprise why this franchise has lasted so long, as nearly every movie is so great. But it's quite a long franchise. I mean, we started this thing in the late 90s, for crying out loud. Now in the year of our Lord and Savior 2023, we're on the 7th Mission Impossible movie, but to know how we got here, we need to go back a little bit. So sometime in the late 90s, some studio execs at Paramount was like, hey, let's take this relatively popular 60s show and give it a big Hollywood movie. And then another exec goes, that's great, get the Scarface guy to do it. And then in 1996, Brian De Palma gives us the first Mission Impossible movie. I haven't talked about De Palma much on this channel, but I really respect the guy. He's a really impressive filmmaker. He's directed one of my favorite movies, Phantom of the Paradise. A movie I can only describe as basically Phantom of the Opera on a fuck ton of coke. Probably the same amount of coke Tony Montana was on in Scarface, honestly. It's clear De Palma wanted to emulate the feeling of the TV show in making this movie. I can only assume that though, as I haven't given myself time to watch the show. But from the way it's edited and shot alone, it gives off that feeling. I'm sure this is a scene that everyone talks about, but I love how this scene in the restaurant is shot. A big thing about De Palma is he knows how to make his movies look fucking cool. The story of the first one is simple enough. Tom Cruise's first portrayal of the Ethan Hunt character, who goes on the run after being elaborately framed for having his whole crew killed. They bring Emilio Estevez into this movie and kill him off in the first 5 minutes. Sucks for him. Jon Voight's in the movie too, and while you can't tell at first, he obviously ends up being the villain in this film, being behind everything from the start. He's always good at being this kind of over-the-top villain, especially in movies like Anaconda, so going into this, I did kind of expect him to have some sort of bigger plot in the whole thing. The action's great in this movie. There's really tense scenes too. It's clear why this scene has become the most iconic in not just this franchise, but pop culture as a whole. In context of the film, it's a really brilliant exploration of how to really build tension in a scene. The only real problems of this movie is that some of the CGI is incredibly dated. It's an overused joke in the film community at this stage, but fuck me, the helicopter in this scene at the end of the movie looks awful now, and probably did back then as well. Overall though, it's a great fucking movie. A couple of years later, in the year 2000, we get Mission Impossible 2, this time with a new director, this director being John Woo. Somehow the most perfect and oddest choice they could have gone with, but my god, did they get him at the perfect time. This will be the most 2000s movie you'll ever watch in your damn life. I've only seen one other movie by this guy, that movie of course being the magnificent masterpiece that is Face Off. An absolutely bonkers, over-the-top, overly dramatic action movie with Nicolas Cage and John Travolta. It's an incredibly stupid movie, but my god, does it provide some quality entertainment. However, as batshit as Face Off is, I don't think John Woo's style fully translates well into a Mission Impossible movie. The acting feels significantly worse, not just from the last movie, but in the franchise as a whole. It really makes it feel out of place when you watch it with all the other movies. The action is, well, unsurprisingly, really over the top. If you can have a ton of fun with movies like this, then maybe you'll like it. But honestly, the story really brings it down, and it didn't do much to hold it together as a film. The third movie is fucking great. A massive improvement from the previous entry, but it's in around the same quality as the first. Maybe being a little bit better. J.J. Abrams takes over the directing for this movie, and you can tell it's one of his by the use of the good old lens flares. This movie has that look, you know what I mean? Of the mid-2000s. It looks like a fucking Transformers movie. I guess this was just a trend at the time for action movies to make them look extremely glossy. The action in this movie I can't really comment on because for whatever reason JJ thought it would be a brilliant idea to have the camera shake around a lot, mixed in with a bunch of close-ups during intense action scenes. It's similar to how Batman Begins did their action scenes. You can't see shit! But what about everything else? This movie has the best opening in the franchise. We're dropped into this in medias res opening, and we see Tom Cruise and Philip Seymour Hoffman. He gives such an electrifying performance in this film. I don't know why people don't bring him up more when they talk about great on-screen villains, because he is fantastic in this. He's just incredibly menacing, and sure, maybe you could jot that down as one-dimensional, but my god, the dialogue he's given in this movie and what he's able to do with it is fucking incredible. You're immediately intimidated by him whenever he's on screen and are almost anxious about what he's gonna do as he sets himself up as this guy who can get whatever he wants whenever he wants. I love this performance. I love him in this movie. This film's where we're introduced to Simon Pegg's character, who from this point in will become a recurring character in the franchise. Honestly, in a way, this may sound weird, but you could genuinely start this franchise from the third film, as they don't give too much of the last two movies in this one. So if you're planning to binge these movies, there you go. Ghost Protocol is the fourth in the franchise, and this movie is directed by Brad Bird, who made literally the best Pixar movies that'll never be topped. This was the movie where the franchise started taking more risks, and by more risks, I mean, of course, it's the beginning of the Tom Cruise Suicide Watch Power Hour. Looking at behind the scenes footage for the now infamous building scaling scene is still really impressive. He's got more balls than me, that's for sure. It honestly makes for one of the most tense scenes we haven't really seen since the first movie. The rest of this film is pretty good too. The acting is still consistently up to speed. I will say, while the opening is cool, it's nowhere near instantly gripping than the third movie's opening, but it's still pretty great. I think the villain in this movie is insanely bland and not memorable at all. Like, even the second movie's villain was very one-note, but I mean, he had a funny accent, so that's some redeemable quality. The villain in this movie is just some guy that has, like, missile codes. That's it. Overall, though, it's another fun time, but I don't think it does anything incredibly new this time around. After that, we got Rogue Nation, which is where there's some level of consistency, as from now on, we have the same guy directing the next couple of movies. This one is really good. It opens with that insane plane stunt where Tom Cruise actually hung off the side of a plane. Watching it with that knowledge not only makes it the most ridiculous thing ever, but it's still really cool in a way. The action is great in this movie. There's a big chase scene that I thought was done really well. They give the characters the usual banter, but I think some of the soft, humorous moments are done well more this time around. While before there was no real connection, I think despite that, they've really given time to these characters for them to grow and develop, and it's really appreciated to see. It's one of those rare franchises that remain consistently good. After Rogue Nation, we had Fallout. At this point in the franchise, I'm convinced Tom Cruise might actually be insane. He's jumping out of airplanes, doing crazy shit in a helicopter, and it's all real, and you can tell it's real. And it makes you fucking anxious. That whole helicopter sequence is insane. The rest of the movie is good too. The action in it feels real. Like, it really looks like it hurts in this movie, and you can feel that watching it. The whole bathroom fight is a good example of some thrilling action. I will say, while these movies are still consistently good, I feel like the director of these last couple of movies has kind of abandoned how stylish the older movies used to be. And in fairness, that could be in favor of these death-defying set pieces, but in a way, you'd miss it. I really liked Henry Cavill in this film. This is around the time where Justice League was doing reshoots and he didn't shave his mustache. He had in this movie, and thus the infamous CGI lip was born. His character in this has a lot going on. He works well as a villain, for sure. There's something about him that feels very sly. So while I don't think there's much style going on, it's really thrilling, and it's still a really enjoyable movie. So what does the new movie, Dead Reckoning, have to offer? Firstly, I want to say, I think Christopher McQuarrie has found his footing with this movie, especially in terms of the cinematography and editing. This film really harkens back to those first couple of movies with its crazy camera angles and really cool shots that make for an even more interesting watch. Sometimes the editing choices were a little odd. There would be occasional post-production zooms, the kind of zooms you'd find in a YouTube video where they try to avoid copyright. It didn't bother me, but it was just really jarring when it first happened. While this is a two-parter, because that's kind of a trend to do now, it doesn't blue ball you. If anything, it feels like its own complete film that can stand on its own. Something I can't say for, let's go with a recent example, the new Spider-Verse movie. As incredible as that is, you can't simply watch that on its own and then feel satisfied. At the same time, this film could have been 4 hours long and I wouldn't have given a shit. But Hollywood knows the detrimental damage that's been done on, we'll say, my generation, how we need 5 things happening at once to stay entertained, with Subway Surfers at the bottom of the screen. Plus, attention spans are getting shorter, so that's probably why as well. At the same time, this movie's long, just short over 2 hours and 40 minutes, and it never feels like it at all. The pacing of this movie is really well done. There's lots of long sequences that are gripping enough to keep you entertained without it going on too long. As with all these movies recently, the stunts are incredible. I mean, my god, Tom Cruise has to be on Suicide Watch or he is genuinely just insane. He's running a motorcycle off a fucking cliff and speed flying off it, which is some extreme sport that's really dangerous, obviously. I mean, they built a whole fucking train from scratch, one so they could fight on top of it, and it looks great. It looks much better than Indiana Jones 5's train scene, that's for sure. They wrecked the train too. A bridge blows up and half the carts on the train are just falling into these pits. And you can just easily tell it's all real and you don't feel cheated in these movies. There's a long car chase scene that was really cool, real tense and exciting. There's a bit of humor thrown in, and while some of it works, some of it doesn't. There's one bit in particular I felt went on a little too long than it had to. It was treading the line of like MCU humor, dude. Everyone does a great job in their roles, as always. Hayley Atwell is a greatly appreciated addition to the cast. I thought her character was really cool. Make her badass without her having a superiority complex like a lot of writers usually do nowadays. Basically, she didn't feel like she wants to take over as the lead of the franchise, which is so refreshing to see. You know, we've had such a slog when it comes to summer blockbusters this year. You know, The Flash crashed and burned along with Indiana Jones 5 because they were just corporate shit stains that don't deserve your time. Well, this new Mission Impossible movie feels like a fucking movie. You can tell it was made by filmmakers who really give a shit and are really passionate about the craft and are passionate about this franchise to have it this consistently great and entertaining. I'm giving Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, one fucking title, 4.5 stars. A truly exciting, fun, and incredible stupid action movie that has solidified itself to be a worthy addition to this franchise and makes for such an incredibly entertaining watch.